I never thought a simple sandwich would change my life, but here we are. It was a Tuesday morning, I remember, because Tuesdays at the warehouse are always the worst. The overnight shipment comes in, and everything's chaos until lunch. I'd been working there for maybe 3 months, still new enough that I kept my head down and tried not to mess up the inventory counts. That particular morning I'd overslept, missed breakfast, and in my rush out the door, I'd completely forgotten to grab the lunch I'd packed the night before. It was sitting in my fridge at home, mocking me from miles away. My partner that day was Miles. We'd been paired up for warehouse duty about a week earlier, and honestly I was still getting used to him. He was one of those guys who seemed comfortable in his own skin in a way I'd never quite managed. Tall, broad shoulders, always wore these fitted t-shirts that somehow looked casual and put together at the same time. He had this easy smile and dark hair that fell just slightly over his forehead, and he was genuinely nice to everyone. Not in a fake way, but in that way where you could tell he actually cared about people. It made me nervous, if I'm being honest. I wasn't used to working with someone who actually wanted to talk, who asked questions about my life, who remembered details from conversations we'd had days before. By 11:30 that morning, I was running on empty. My stomach had been growling for an hour and I kept trying to time my movements so the sound of the forklift would cover it up. I was scanning boxes in the back corner when I felt this weird dizzy spell hit me. Nothing major, just enough that I had to stop and put my hand against the shelf to steady myself. I closed my eyes for a second, took a breath, tried to pull it together. That's when I heard his voice. "Hey Dylan, you good?" I opened my eyes and Miles was standing there with this concerned look on his face, his head tilted slightly to the side. God, even the way he looked at me made my chest feel tight. I'd been trying to ignore that feeling for days now, the way my pulse picked up when he came around, the way I found myself watching him when I thought he wasn't looking. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, straightening up and trying to look normal. "Just moved too fast, got a head rush or something." It was a terrible lie and we both knew it. Miles just looked at me for a long moment, his brown eyes searching my face like he was trying to figure something out. Then he glanced at his watch. "Lunch break's in 10 minutes, he said. "You bringing anything today?" And there it was, the question I'd been dreading. I shook my head, tried to play it off. "Nah, forgot my lunch at home. I'll just grab something from the vending machine." The vending machine had stale chips and candy bars that cost twice what they should. It wasn't a real meal, but it would get me through the afternoon. Miles frowned. Not like he was judging me, but like he was genuinely bothered by this information. "The vending machine's garbage," he said. "Come on, I packed extra. You can share mine." Before I could protest, he was already walking toward the break room and I found myself following him, my heart doing this stupid flutter thing that I'd become way too familiar with over the past week. The break room was mostly empty when we got there. A couple of guys from shipping were finishing up, heading back out. Miles grabbed his lunch bag from the fridge, one of those insulated ones that looked well used and practical. We sat at the corner table, the one by the window that looked out over the loading docks. He unzipped the bag and started pulling out containers. A sandwich cut in half, an apple, a bag of chips, some kind of pasta salad, a couple of granola bars. It was like he'd packed for 2 people. "Here," he said, pushing half the sandwich toward me along with half the chips. "Turkey and Swiss, nothing fancy. There's mustard and mayo on it, hope that's okay." I stared at the food, then at him. He was already biting into his half of the sandwich, acting like this was the most normal thing in the world. Like sharing his lunch with a coworker he barely knew was just something people did. "Miles, I can't take your lunch," I said, but my stomach betrayed me with another loud growl. He laughed, this warm sound that made something in my chest ache. "Dude, you look like you need it. Seriously, I always pack too much anyway. My mum got me in the habit and I never broke it." He pushed the food closer. "Just eat, okay? You're gonna pass out if you don't, and then I'll have to fill out incident reports and those things are a pain." So I ate, and it was the best sandwich I'd had in months. Probably because I was starving, but also because there was something about the way he'd just offered it. No hesitation, no making a big deal out of it. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and I found myself sneaking glances at him. The way his jaw moved when he chewed, the way he'd wipe his mouth with the back of his hand, the way his forearms looked with his sleeves rolled up. I was noticing things I had no business noticing, cataloguing details like my brain was trying to memorize him. "You doing okay?" he asked after a while, and I realized I'd been staring. I felt heat rush to my face. "Yeah, sorry, just zoned out." He smiled at me, this soft expression that made my stomach flip. "You zone out a lot. I've noticed." Of course he'd noticed. Miles noticed everything. "Where do you go when you do that? You get this faraway look." I didn't know how to answer that. I couldn't exactly say that lately when I zoned out. I was usually thinking about him, about the way he laughed, or the way he said my name, or the growing realization that I was developing feelings I absolutely should not be having for my coworker. So instead I just shrugged. Nowhere interesting, just thinking. He nodded like he understood, like he got that sometimes people needed to keep their thoughts private. We finished eating and he packed up the containers, tossed the trash. "Feel better?" he asked, and I did. Not just because of the food, but because of this, whatever this was. This moment of someone caring enough to notice I was struggling and doing something about it without making me feel weak or embarrassed. "Yeah," I said. "Thanks, Miles, really. I owe you." He waved it off. "Nah, don't worry about it. Just don't forget your lunch tomorrow, okay?" But I did forget my lunch the next day. Not on purpose, at least not consciously, but when my alarm went off that morning I hit snooze twice, and then I was rushing again, and the lunch stayed in the fridge. When Miles saw me empty-handed at lunch, he just shook his head with this little smile. "Come on," he said, and once again we shared his lunch. Turkey and Swiss again, but this time there was a cookie too, and he split it down the middle with his hands, gave me the bigger half. It became a pattern. Over the next 2 weeks I forgot my lunch more times than I care to admit, and every single time Miles shared his without question. We started taking our breaks together, sitting at that same corner table, and slowly I learned things about him. He was 26, 2 years older than me. He'd moved to the city 6 months ago from a small town upstate. He was taking night classes at the community college, working toward a business degree. He loved old movies, the kind in black and white that nobody our age watched. He had a younger sister he talked to every Sunday. He was terrible at video games but played them anyway because they were fun. He wanted to travel someday, see places that weren't the small town he grew up in, or the warehouse district where we worked. And the more I learned, the harder I fell, because it wasn't just that Miles was attractive, though he absolutely was. It was that he was kind and thoughtful and funny in this understated way. It was the way he remembered that I liked my coffee with 2 sugars, the way he'd text me on our days off with random observations or funny pictures, the way he looked at me sometimes like he was trying to figure me out but in a way that felt curious rather than judgmental. I started packing 2 lunches. I told myself it was practical, that I was just returning the favour, but really I wanted an excuse to keep having lunch with him. When I showed up with 2 paper bags that 3rd week, Miles raised his eyebrows. "Look at you, being prepared," he said. "Actually," I said, and my voice came out shakier than I wanted, "I packed one for you. You know, since you've been feeding me for weeks." The look on his face did something to me. Surprise first, then this soft warmth that made his whole expression light up. "You didn't have to do that," he said. But he was smiling as he took the bag, and when our fingers brushed in the exchange, I felt electricity shoot up my arm. We sat at our usual table and he opened the bag, pulled out the sandwich I'd made. "PB&J," I said. I didn't know what you liked, so I went basic. He took a bite and made this appreciative sound that I felt in places I shouldn't be feeling anything at work. "This is really good," he said. "You make it with the crunchy peanut butter?" I nodded. "Only way to do it." We ate our matching lunches and it felt domestic in a way that scared me and thrilled me at the same time. Like we were crossing some invisible line from co-workers who shared meals to something else, something I couldn't quite name but desperately wanted. That afternoon we were reorganizing the steel shelving units in Section D, and Miles was up on the ladder while I spotted him from below. He was reaching for a box on the top shelf and his shirt rode up, exposing a strip of skin at his lower back, and I had to physically look away because the want that hit me was so intense it hurt. I was in trouble. I was in such deep trouble, and I didn't know what to do about it. "Dylan?" His voice brought me back and I looked up to find him watching me from the ladder, that same searching expression on his face. "You okay? You've been weird today." Weird. That was one way to put it. "I'm fine," I said automatically, but he was climbing down the ladder now, coming to stand in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne or deodorant or whatever it was that made him smell like cedar and something clean. "You keep saying that," he said quietly, "but I don't think you are." We were in the back corner of the warehouse where nobody ever came unless they had to. The afternoon sun was streaming through the high windows, catching dust motes in the air, and Miles was looking at me with such genuine concern that I felt something crack open in my chest. "Talk to me," he said. "What's going on?" I couldn't. I couldn't tell him that I'd spent the last 3 weeks falling for him, that I thought about him constantly, that sharing lunch with him had become the best part of my day, that I was terrified and exhilarated and so far out of my depth I couldn't see the surface anymore. So instead I just shook my head. "It's nothing. I'm just tired." Miles reached out and put his hand on my shoulder, and that simple touch made my breath catch. "If something's bothering you, you can tell me. You know that, right?" His thumb was moving in this small circle against my shoulder, probably unconsciously, and it was taking every ounce of my self-control not to lean into it. "We're friends, Dylan. At least I hope we are." "Friends. Right. That's what we were." "Yeah," I managed. "We're friends." He smiled and squeezed my shoulder before letting go, and I immediately missed the contact. We went back to work, but I couldn't focus. That word kept echoing in my head. Friends. Is that all he wanted? Is that all this was to him? That weekend I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him. I spent Saturday cleaning my apartment and doing laundry, and the whole time my mind was replaying every interaction we'd had, looking for signs I might have missed. Did he touch other people the way he touched me? Was he this attentive with everyone? Or was there something more? Something I was too scared to acknowledge? Sunday night my phone buzzed with a text. It was Miles. "You watching anything good?" he'd written. I looked at my TV where I'd been mindlessly scrolling through streaming options for 20 minutes. "Not really. Can't decide." His response came quickly. "Same. Want to come over? I've got this classic film I've been wanting to watch, but it's more fun with company." My heart started racing, going to his place, just the two of us. This was different from lunch breaks at work. This was personal. This was a choice. I typed back, "Sure, what's the address?" and then spent 15 minutes changing my shirt 3 times before finally leaving in the first one I'd put on. Miles lived in a small apartment in a converted building downtown. When he opened the door, he was wearing sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt, his hair slightly damp like he'd just showered, and he looked so relaxed and comfortable that I felt overdressed in my jeans and button-down. "Hey," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Come on in. Want something to drink? I've got beer, soda, water." His apartment was small but cozy, lived in. There were books on the shelves, a decent TV setup, a couch that looked soft and well used, movie posters on the walls, the old classic ones he loved. "Beer's good," I said, following him to the kitchen. He grabbed 2 bottles from the fridge, opened them, handed me one. Our fingers brushed again, and this time I was sure he held the contact a second longer than necessary. We settled on the couch to watch the movie, some film noir from the 40s that I'd never heard of but Miles was excited about. He gave me the whole backstory as the credits rolled, talking about the director and the lead actress, and the impact it had on cinema. I loved watching him talk about things he was passionate about, the way his hands moved, the way his eyes lit up. I was barely paying attention to the actual words, just the sound of his voice, the way he looked at me to make sure I was following along. The movie started and we sat there in the semi-darkness, the TV providing the only light. We were close but not touching, maybe 6 inches between us on the couch. I was hyper-aware of that space, of the way I could feel the heat radiating from his body. About halfway through the film, Miles shifted, stretched his arm across the back of the couch. Not around me exactly, but close enough that if I leaned back I'd be touching him. I didn't lean back. I sat frozen, barely breathing, trying to focus on the movie. On screen someone was getting betrayed in black and white, but all I could think about was the weight of Miles's arm behind me, the possibility of what it would mean if I closed that distance. Then Miles spoke, his voice low. "You're not watching the movie." I turned to look at him and found him already looking at me. In the flickering light from the TV, his face was half in shadow, but I could see his expression clearly enough, something open and vulnerable and questioning. "Neither are you," I whispered. And it was true. He was watching me with an intensity that made my skin feel too tight. "No," he admitted, "I'm not." The air between us felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Miles," I started, but I didn't know how to finish. What was I supposed to say? That I'd been falling for him since that first shared sandwich? That every lunch break together had made it worse? That I was terrified and hopeful and desperate all at once? He shifted closer, his hand moving from the back of the couch to my shoulder, the same place he'd touched me at the warehouse. But this time it felt different, deliberate. "Dylan," he said, and his voice was rough. "Tell me if I'm reading this wrong." He was so close now I could feel his breath on my face. "Tell me to stop and I will." But I didn't want him to stop. I'd never wanted anything less. So instead of speaking, I closed the remaining distance between us and kissed him. It was clumsy at first, tentative, both of us figuring out the angles. But then his hand came up to cup the back of my neck, and the kiss deepened, and it felt like everything I'd been holding back for weeks was pouring out of me. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Miles rested his forehead against mine, his hand still on my neck, thumb brushing along my jaw. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he said quietly. "Since like the second week we started working together. I kept finding excuses to be near you, kept hoping you'd give me some sign that you felt it too." I laughed, shaky and relieved. "I've been terrified you'd figure out how I felt. I thought I was being so obvious." He smiled and kissed me again, softer this time. "You were. I just wasn't sure if I was seeing what I wanted to see or what was actually there." We stayed like that for a while, kissing on his couch with a forgotten movie playing in the background, learning the shape of each other, the taste, the way we fit together. Eventually we settled back to actually watch the end of the film, but this time I was tucked against his side, his arm around me for real, and it felt right in a way nothing else ever had. When the credits rolled, Miles turned off the TV and we sat in the darkness, neither of us wanting to move. "So," he said eventually, "what happens now?" It was a good question. We worked together. We'd have to be careful, professional. But looking at him in the dim light from the street outside, feeling the solid warmth of him beside me, I knew I didn't want to go back to pretending. "Now," I said, "we figure it out, together." He smiled and pulled me closer. I liked the sound of that. I ended up staying the night. Nothing happened beyond more kissing and falling asleep tangled together on his couch, but waking up with him was its own kind of revelation. The way the morning light caught his face, the way he smiled at me still half asleep, the way it felt natural and easy and right. We had coffee together and he made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and we sat at his small kitchen table, planning how we'd handle things at work. Monday morning felt different. We arrived separately, kept things professional on the floor, but at lunch we sat at our usual table, and this time when our knees bumped under the table we didn't move away. We shared our sandwiches like always, but now I knew what his lips tasted like, knew the sound he made when I kissed his neck, knew that this thing between us was real and mutual, and worth whatever complications came with it. The warehouse job was never supposed to be permanent for either of us. It was just a paycheck while we figured out our real lives. But that simple act of Miles sharing his lunch with me, of noticing I needed something and providing it without being asked, had led to this, to us, to the beginning of something I hadn't even known I was looking for. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives are the quiet ones, the small gestures that reveal who people really are. For me, it was a sandwich split in half and offered with genuine care. It was someone seeing me when I felt invisible and deciding I was worth their attention. It was falling in love in a warehouse break room over packed lunches and stolen glances. It wasn't dramatic or extraordinary. It was just real, and that made it everything.